He's one of the rising play-by-play voices in the Music City.
Mr. Clutch does it again! Calm and composed under pressure!
He's taking that same passion from the booth and bringing it to the studio.
To me, there's value in somebody saying they're going to do something and then going out and doing it. They are forcing the committee's hand to make them say, you aren't in.
Honest takes.
I'm not saying he's perfect, he's not, but it could be so much worse.
The hottest debates.
The victim of being a 3-star caliber quarterback with a 5-star last name.
Breaking down the moments that matter and the conversations you may or may not be ready for.
There is no other player in the country that is more important to a team and a program. I don't even think that's necessarily debatable.
A part of the Game Nashville Sports Network. Now, it's 3 and Out. 3 and Out. With your host, Brandon Bigsby.
Welcome to the first ever episode of 3 and Out with Brandon Bigsby, a part of the Game Nashville Sports Network. I am Brandon Bigsby, and guys, we're here. The first episode of this brand new podcast. I'm so excited to get this thing started. A lot that I want to dive into today. We're going to talk some Titans, what we thought of the NFL draft. We'll get into some Preds talk with their general manager search continuing on. We'll talk a little bit of college basketball, the NCAA tournament expanding, and much more. But before I get into all of that, I do have a few shout outs that I want to give, as well as to give you guys a bit of a quick summary of what you can expect from this podcast each and every episode. But before I get into all of that, a few people that I want to make sure to shout out and give their flowers, because without them, this idea would not be what it is. And these people really have helped make this thing come to life. So I want to make sure to put the spotlight on them, because without them, none of this is possible. And I am not in your ears right now. First and foremost, Chase McCabe, our amazing program director at the Game Nashville Sports Network. I came to him a few weeks ago and asked him, hey, what would you think about me starting a podcast? It's something that I've always wanted to do. I've always had a love for just talking sports and sports talk. I grew up listening to sports talk radio. I've always loved listening to sports podcasts, and it's something that I've always wanted to get into. I have so many thoughts and so many opinions about things that are going on in the sports world. And not only would I love that opportunity to get those reps and to kind of hone that skill for myself, but to just also have that platform to be able to express what my thoughts are on some of the stories that are going around, not just locally, but on the national side. I came to him with this idea for 3 and Out. He was for it. He supported me on it. Without him, this would not be possible. So a big thank you to him. Nick Frazier, who made the gorgeous cover art that you see whenever you click on these episodes. An amazing producer, but an even better person. Someone that has really become a friend to me since I came on to the Game Nashville in September. Cannot thank him enough for the work that he put in on it. It turned out better than I could have imagined. So a big shout out to Nick. And then another Nick DeMayo, a longtime mentor, and more importantly, a longtime friend of mine. He's the one that produced and voiced that amazing intro that you heard at the top of the show. None of this comes together without these people. So I wanted to make sure to shout them out, thank them, and give them their well-deserved flowers, because at the end of the day, sure, it's me talking behind the mic, but there are so many people that helped pitch in to really make this idea that I had come into fruition. So I wanted to make sure to give them their proper time and thank them for everything that they have done to make this thing happen. Now, what you can expect from this podcast, I'm going to talk about a little bit of everything. Like I mentioned, it's going to be some local stuff, Titans, Preds, Vanderbilt, some Tennessee stuff. We'll talk both college and professional, but you can also expect some national stuff. We may dive into some things going on throughout college football or college basketball. We may dive into some stuff that are throughout the NFL and the NBA and the NHL. I may even dive into a little bit of NASCAR and dabble into, MLB and different things. We're going to talk about a lot of variety in this podcast. And essentially, what the goal of this is, 3 segments. We're going to have a different topic for each segment. And depending on if I feel, a little bit more talkative on a certain episode, we'll have a short segment at the end called Fourth and Short, to where I have one quick little segment to where we'll wrap it up, where I may have something I just want to get off my chest, or something that I want to talk about that maybe doesn't have that full segment length to it, but still gives you a little bit of punch to end off the episode. So we'll also have some guests here and there that we talk to, and you can expect a little bit of everything. But no matter what it is, you're going to hear my honest take. I'm not for the hot shot, radio shock jock stuff. I'm not a big fan of that, but I'm also going to throw some opinions out there. And you may not always agree with them, but the best thing about sports talk and the best thing about sports fandom and the sports community is that we can have those strong opinions. We may not always agree with them. Those opinions may be a little bit out there. But the thing about it is that it brings us all together and all comes with that passion. And with me, it's going to come from an honest truth. So that's a little bit of what you can expect from this thing. I am so excited to get this started. So without further ado, let's get into our first topic of the episode. All right, let's get into the debate that seems to be taking over the Tennessee Titans realm. And that is around the number 4 overall pick, the wide receiver out of the Ohio State University, Carnell Tate. Now, I'm going to approach this from a few different angles, and I'm going to approach this from my personal opinion, and I'm going to approach this from what a lot of fans seem to think about Carnell Tate and what a lot of outsiders seem to think about Carnell Tate. And I'm going to start this out by pointing out the obvious. Yes, it is disappointing that the Titans did not get to pick Jeremiah Love. I think that if you were to put Mike Borgonzi on a lie detector and you were to ask him if Jeremiah Love still been available at 4, would you still have picked Carnell Tate? I think he probably would have said no. Jeremiah Love was the Tennessee Titans' best player on the board. I will not be convinced otherwise. I will always believe that. I think that Jeremiah Love is a generational talent. And based on everything that we had heard about the Titans and Jeremiah Love since January, I believe that Tennessee's front office thought the same thing of him. However, Mike Borgonzi did not get the opportunity to have that decision because Arizona, despite paying Tyler Algier and keeping James Conner around and keeping Trey Benson around, decided to pick Jeremiah Love at 3rd overall. And I think that's a shame because Jeremiah Love in the, as we're now calling it, Titans blue, would have been really fun to watch. And the fit made so much sense because not only are you getting somebody who would have been a borderline generational type player, I think is a generational talent, Jeremiah Love, who fits in that mold of a Bijan Robinson or a Christian McCaffrey or a Saquon Barkley, but it also just fit the Titans so well. A team that in its best years has had that hard-hitting, reliable game on the ground. And that is exactly what Jeremiah Love could have provided, along with being able to receive the ball, along with being able to be a respectable pass blocker. Jeremiah Love, in terms of a pure running back prospect, is about as complete of a player as you could possibly ask for. And I'm sure that Mike Borgonzi and the Tennessee Titans, just as much as Titans fans and just as much as a lot of Titans media and just as much as myself, would have loved for Jeremiah Love to have had his name called at number 4. But that just was not how things happen. So, as it is a front office's job to do, the Tennessee Titans had to pivot. They had to go down their board to the next player that they thought was best available at number 4. And lo and behold, Carnell Tate is the pick for the Tennessee Titans at number 4 overall. Now, I'm going to be totally honest. The pick, when I first saw it, caught me by surprise. And I didn't love it. I'm not going to lie. I told you guys in the intro, I am always going to be upfront and honest and give you my true thoughts. I did not love the Carnell Tate pick at first glance. However, the more I thought about it, the more I looked into it, the more I looked into the roster and the situation and just the perspective that Tennessee likely had when they made the selection, not only did it start to make more sense, but the more I actually started to find myself really liking the pick. And look, I know that there are a lot of people both within and outside of the Tennessee Titans realm, so to speak, that are saying that Carnell Tate was a reach. And if you believe that, then I respect it. And I won't even necessarily argue on it because the number 4 overall pick being used on a wide receiver who is not seen as a true wide receiver 1 in the NFL and was not wide receiver 1 on his own college team is not something that typically warrants being picked in the top 5. And I understand that. However, I'm going to ask you to consider a few things. Number one, who would have been wide receiver 1 next to Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State? Jeremiah Smith is a generational talent. If Jeremiah Smith was available in this year's draft, he would have gone number 2 overall. If Jeremiah Smith was available in last year's draft, he would have gone number 2 overall. So what exactly is Carnell Tate supposed to do to prove that he's a wide receiver 1 when he wasn't able to have that chance? If you place Carnell Tate on any other college football team in the country, he is their wide receiver 1, and I don't think there is much of a doubt or a question about that. He's not the only player who has not been wide receiver 1 on his college team and has been a first-round pick. Jackson Smith-Njigba was not wide receiver 1 on Ohio State. Terry McLaurin was not wide receiver 1 on Ohio State, and he was not a first-round pick, but I think he turned out pretty fine and is still one of the better receivers in the NFL for Washington right now. Justin Jefferson at LSU was not wide receiver 1 because he was next to a certain receiver named Jamar Chase. As we mentioned with Jackson Smith-Njigba earlier, he was next to Marvin Harrison Jr. He was next to Emeka Egbuka, who was also not wide receiver 1 on his own team. What exactly was Carnell Tate supposed to do to prove that he was a wide receiver 1? Maybe Ohio State simply had 2 wide receiver 1s. And Carnell Tate was just simply wide receiver 2 by name. Have we ever thought about that? Have we ever thought about the possibility that maybe both of those guys were elite level college receivers? And that Carnell Tate, just because he happened to be next to Jeremiah Smith and wasn't wide receiver 1 on the depth chart, doesn't mean he can't be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL? Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And I think it is a lazy take to say that Carnell Tate can't be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL just because he wasn't in college, and that the only reason he wasn't was because he had a generational player next to him. And the other argument that I've seen with Carnell Tate is he's slow. He ran a 4.53 at the combine. He doesn't have the speed. He can't separate. And if you think that Carnell Tate can't separate, I implore you to go watch his tape again from his Ohio State days. Carnell Tate is an elite level route runner. He has great hands. He very rarely, if ever, drops the ball. And his speed is not that bad. Can I remind you guys that a 4.53 is not disastrous? I know we have gotten so used to guys running in the 4.4s, and we expect these dudes to run these 4.4, 4.3 level 40 times, but that's not every receiver, man. It's not. And that's okay. And to help prove that point, I'm going to give you some examples of guys who ran a 4.53 or lower at the NFL Combine. And when I say these names, I want you to answer this question. Would you or would you not take this receiver on the Tennessee Titans in their prime? Mike Evans, a guy that had eclipsed 1,000 yards every single season of his NFL career prior to this past season due to injury. Mike Evans ran a 4.53, the exact same time as Carnell Tate. T. Higgins, who has been the most common comparison for Carnell Tate, ran a 4.54. Now, T. Higgins is not wide receiver 1 on his team. He is wide receiver 2. But the reason that is because he is next to arguably the best receiver in the world in Jamar Chase. You can argue that between him or Jackson Smith-Njigba or Puka Nacua or Justin Jefferson or whoever. But Jamar Chase is unquestionably in that conversation, and T. Higgins just happens to be next to him. You put him on most of the other teams in the NFL, and he is their wide receiver 1. He ran a 4.54. Devontae Adams, one of the best receivers in modern NFL history, ran a 4.56 at the NFL Combine. DeAndre Hopkins ran a 4.57. Larry Fitzgerald, a NFL Hall of Famer recently, ran a 4.6. Keenan Allen, a reliable wide receiver 1 for many years for the San Diego and Los Angeles Chargers, ran a 4.71. That is truly slow for an NFL wide receiver. And I think he turned out fine. And I think that many people would have taken Keenan Allen on the Tennessee Titans during his NFL career, or during the prime of his NFL career, rather. And if you want to dive even deeper in the history, a certain NFL wide receiver named Jerry Rice ran a 4.6. Some speculate that his time was as low as a 4.71. Not all great receivers run flying speeds in the 40-yard dash. You do not have to be a burner to be great in the NFL. You do need to have athleticism. You do need to be able to break away a little bit. But being able to break away and being able to separate is not all about top-end speed. Route running is a huge part of that. Cutting and elusiveness and agility are huge parts of that. Acceleration, which is not the same thing as speed, is a huge part of that. Carnell Tate has those things. And if you want the other side of this argument about, oh, well, what about the fast receivers? They could be good too. I also have a list of some of the fastest 40 times for receivers in the NFL Combine. And though some of these are a little bit murkier due to different circumstances, here are the list of players that ran the fastest 40 times for receivers in NFL history. Xavier Worthy ran a 4.21, which is the NFL Combine record in 2024. Now, Xavier Worthy, we cannot really judge yet. It's too early. He's only had 2 years of his NFL career. Last season, it was heavily cut short by injury. We can't really say what Xavier Worthy is going to be yet. However, from what we have seen from Xavier Worthy, he more than likely is not going to be an elite wide receiver one. However, we don't know that yet. It would not be fair to judge that. So we're just going to leave that be what it is. But Xavier Worthy, that 4.21, that's the number one time. After that, it gets pretty murky. John Ross ran a 4.22 in 2017. He was a first-round pick with the Cincinnati Bengals. And if you remember John Ross, that 40 time pretty much is exclusively what made him a first-round pick. That was what did it. And when you look at how John Ross did in his NFL career, it was not particularly inspiring. He did not return the value on that pick. Here are John Ross's NFL stats during his career. 38 games played, 63 receptions, 963 yards, and 11 touchdowns. He played 4 years in Cincinnati, played 1 year with the New York Giants, and then to Philadelphia in 2024, played 1 game, and has not been on an NFL field since. Not a great pick and not a great use of the 9th overall pick, by the way, of the 2017 NFL draft. The list goes on. Henry Ruggs III ran a 4.27. Obviously, we can't say much about that due to the off-the-field thing, so we're just going to leave that there. Marquise Goodwin ran that same time in 2013. Not a bad receiver, but not a wide receiver one. Realistically, more of a borderline wide receiver 2, ideally wide receiver 3. Tyquan Thornton, wide receiver 3. J.J. Nelson, same deal. Jacoby Ford, same deal. Darius Hayward-Bay, solid wide receiver 2 during his day, had some great years with the Raiders, ran a 4.3 in 2009. Velus Jones Jr. ran a 4.31, the pride of Rocky Top. Not a guy that I think many people were jumping up and down the pick high in the first round. That's why he was a day 2, day 3 pick, and he has mainly been a special teams player who, by the way, converted from receiver to running back later in his career. The rest, Paris Campbell, Andy Isabella, and Curtis Samuel. Last time I checked, none of these players are wide receiver 1s. Most of these players are not even wide receiver 2s. And there are multiple of these guys that are not even wide receiver 3s and are borderline NFL roster players. Again, speed is not everything in the NFL. Is it important? Yes, absolutely. Would you like to have it? No doubt about it. But is it the main reason to discount Carnell Tate from being a guy who can be a wide receiver 1? Absolutely not. Because if you would have taken Mike Evans, if you would have taken T. Higgins, who, by the way, a lot of people, especially Titans fans, were clamoring for the Titans to go out and sign in free agency if the Bengals didn't retain him. If you would take him, if you would take Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, guys that ran the exact same, if not slower times than Carnell Tate did, then I think that the least that we can do is give Carnell Tate the chance and the opportunity to prove whether he is or isn't a wide receiver 1 caliber guy. That's all I'm asking here. I'm not saying he's going to be. I don't think that Carnell Tate is going to be an all-pro level guy. But I don't need Carnell Tate to be an all-pro level guy. What I need Carnell Tate to be is the Tennessee Titans' #1 wide receiver for about the next, 8 to 10 years. I want Carnell Tate to be a Tennessee Titan into his second contract. Because if you look at the past first-round picks for the Tennessee Titans, not many of them have made it into their second contract. Peter Skoronski's looking pretty darn good right now. They just gave him the 5th-year option, so that's looking like that's somebody that will probably be able to stick around who was a first-round pick. But after that, you have to go back as far as Jeffrey Simmons as the last first-round pick for the Tennessee Titans to make it in the contract #2. And even outside of the first round, there have been very few Titans draft picks who have made it in the contract #2. I'm just going off the top of my head, but outside of Jeffrey Simmons and Amani Hooker, I can't think of anyone else over the last 7, 8, 9 years who have made it more than one contract into their tenure in Tennessee. A.J. Brown should have, but obviously we know why he didn't. And that's another part of this. All I need for Carnell Tate to be is wide receiver 1 because the Titans haven't had a bona fide wide receiver 1 since they traded A.J. Brown for scraps. There's another first-round pick, by the way, who did not pan out, Traylon Burks. I don't need Carnell Tate to be Jamar Chase. I don't need Carnell Tate to be Justin Jefferson. I don't need him to be Jackson Smith-Njigba. I don't need him to be Puka Nacua. I don't even need him to be T. Higgins. I need Carnell Tate to be the best possible version of Carnell Tate. I need Carnell Tate to be the first bona fide franchise wide receiver that the Tennessee Titans have had since Derek Mason. That is the last time the Titans have had a wide receiver 1 that has been in the building and has stuck around with this franchise. That is what I need Carnell Tate to be. And if Carnell Tate can be that, then this pick was worth it for Mike Borgonzi and the Tennessee Titans. Carnell Tate is a wide receiver who was a 5-star prospect, has a great pedigree, comes from a school that has a long history of successful wide receivers in the NFL, especially recently. That is what you are getting in Carnell Tate. And I think the Carnell Tate will end up being a fine pick for the Tennessee Titans. All I am asking is that you give him the chance to prove what he can or can't be. I don't think that's unreasonable. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the Nashville Predators because the offseason is fast approaching. We're already into the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Obviously, the Predators not participating in that, but there still is plenty to talk about with this team because we know they're picking 10th overall. What we don't know, however, is who is going to be making that pick. Who could it be? What's it going to look like? And even more importantly, what is going to be the future plan of the Nashville Predators? Because it feels like they are at a bit of a crossroads where they have to pick one direction or the other. And there is very much a divide in the fan base and in the media on which direction they should take. I'm going to give you my thoughts on all of that next, so make sure you stick around. You are listening to 3 and Out with Brandon Bigsby, a part of the Game Nashville Sports Network. All right, let's talk Preds. The Nashville Predators, man, oh man, oh man. So much to talk about with this team. And it's interesting because typically when a team doesn't make the playoffs, it feels like there's a lot of doom and gloom around it. But with the Predators, despite missing the playoffs for a second straight season, I don't really feel that around this team. I feel confusion. I feel trepidation. But I don't feel a doom and gloom around the franchise. And I'll get to those reasons a little bit later. But there is one thing that is an elephant in the room that I feel like has to be addressed. And that is the open general manager spot for the Nashville Predators. Barry Trotz announced a few months ago that he will be retiring and will be stepping down from his GM position. And since then, the Predators have been in an active search for that next general manager. There have been many names thrown out there, some internal, some external. And recently, as of a few weeks ago, a new name has been brought into the mix in Tom Fitzgerald, the former general manager of the New Jersey Devils. But even more importantly, for the Nashville Predators' sake, the first ever captain of the Nashville Predators as an organization. Now, for most Preds fans, this raises some red flags. And if you're a more casual hockey fan, you may wonder why. The Nashville Predators have gained a reputation of keeping things within the family, which, as much as you love and respect loyalty, does come to a point to where when the results aren't there, it could become a fault. We saw that with Barry Trotz being the pick, somebody who was a head coach for the Predators for pretty much the franchise's entire existence, most of my childhood, and had no general manager experience. But when David Poile decided to step back and retire, Barry Trotz was the pick to be the next Predators GM. Somebody that was a part of the Nashville Predators family tree, so to speak. And though Barry Trotz, I think, has done some things well, Barry Trotz has also made some very questionable decisions. He has had this mentality of, we're going to try to win now, but we're also going to build for the future. And in my personal opinion, I don't think that works. I think you have to commit to either the rebuild or you have to commit to trying to build a championship contender for that coming season. I don't think you can have this half in, half out mentality because it leads to split decisions that bring you into mediocrity. And with what we have seen from the Nashville Predators over these last 3 or 4 years is the definition of mediocrity. And I know that sounds harsh, but I want to bring up a stat to you that is going to sound crazy, but it is the true reality of where the Nashville Predators are right now as a franchise. The last time the Nashville Predators won a playoff series was in 2018 against the Colorado Avalanche. Since then, the Colorado Avalanche have won a Stanley Cup. Ryan Johansson, who was the number one center for the Nashville Predators in that season, is now retired. Do you see the problem with some of this? It has been a long time since the Nashville Predators have been a legitimate, serious playoff threat. They've made it multiple times since then. They've even kept series competitive on multiple occasions since then. But the Nashville Predators have not been a contender since 2019 when they won the division and lost in 6 games in the first round to the Dallas Stars, who also, by the way, since then, have made the Stanley Cup final. The Predators have been surpassed by many organizations in the NHL. I'll even go to the Eastern Conference with the Montreal Canadiens, a team that was in the muddy middle, then made an improbable run to the Stanley Cup final, then tore it all down and rebuilt, and now, as we speak, are currently in the second round of the NHL playoffs against Buffalo. I'm saying all of this to say this. The Preds are in a situation to where they have been stuck in the same place for the better part of a decade. They make the playoffs. They're good enough to compete with some of these teams that are in the playoffs, but they're not the caliber of team that can actually make a run and compete for a Stanley Cup. And my question to you is this: what is your ultimate goal if you are the Nashville Predators front office? Is it simply to win games and be competitive? Or is it to compete for a title, to compete for a banner? That's what I want. And if I am these guys in the front office, if I am the coaches, if I am one of the players, I want to compete for a Stanley Cup title. I don't want to make the playoffs just to lose in 5 to Colorado. I don't want to make the playoffs just to be the first wild card or third in the division and lose in 6 games to the Minnesota Wild or the Dallas Stars. I don't have any interest in that. I just don't. And that has been the same story for the Nashville Predators for the last 7 years. So for those that say, I want to just rip it from the studs and tear it down and rebuild, I get it. I really do. Because that is where that comes from. Sometimes you have to have pain for a few years to bring in proper talent. And I know that there are some teams that tear it down and rebuild and can't climb their way back up. But this is my counterpoint to that. If you believe in your management, if you believe that your front office is good at what they do and you believe that they are competent, then shouldn't you be able to trust them to rebuild the team? shouldn't you be able to trust their vision in saying, hey, we're going to maybe struggle for a couple of years. We're going to bring in young talent. We're going to bring in a lot of assets for some of these older guys that want to go out and compete for Stanley Cups. We're going to go and get younger. We're going to get faster. We're going to be exciting. And it may hurt for a couple of years. There might be some lean times in Bridgestone Arena. But you know what? I would argue that I would rather have lean times for a couple of years with the promise of give us 2 or 3 years and things will be better in the future than to constantly be stuck at a 38 to 42 win pace, be a wild card team, and your grand prize is being swept by the Colorado Avalanche or the Vegas Golden Knights or the Edmonton Oilers, who are true Stanley Cup contenders year in, year out. Now, here's the flip side to that. I don't think the Nashville Predators as an organization are in a dire enough situation to where they should have to do that. The prospect pool is top 5 in the NHL. They have loads of assets with draft picks. They have some talent that they've been able to sort of slowly but surely build around. Now, the development of that talent, I think, is another conversation, and we're going to get into that in another episode because I really do think there is a conversation to be had around not the drafting of the Nashville Predators, but the development of talent in their pipeline and how that has been questionable at best. But I digress. The Predators have a lot of the things that rebuilding teams need. The only thing that they lack is that one key superstar piece that you ideally want to have. That Connor Bedard, that Macklin Celebrini, or as I guess the Toronto Maple Leafs are about to experience, Gavin McKenna, after they just won the NHL draft lottery a few nights ago. Nashville does not have that. They never have had that. And they picked 5th last season. They used that pick on Brady Martin, who was seen as a bit of a reach, especially when you compare it to guys like James Higgins and Porter Martone, who are these young, high-flying, exciting players who have since come into the NHL on playoff teams now, with Martone being on the Philadelphia Flyers and Higgins being on the Boston Bruins, have come in and have now logged NHL minutes and have looked pretty impressive in the few minutes that they have gotten in professional league hockey. Brady Martin, on the other hand, spent his season in juniors, playing in the CHL. And when his CHL season ended, being called up to Milwaukee for a short stint to play with the Predators minor league team. And in the limited time he got in Milwaukee, he looked pretty promising. And I think that Brady Martin can be a solid player. But can Brady Martin be a elite level player? I don't know. Realistically, the common consensus with Brady Martin, even when he was drafted, is that he is more than likely a very good second line center. And you'll take that, but it is not what the Predators need most, which is that elite game-breaking talent at the forward position. They just don't have that right now. And though tanking is technically the easiest way to get a crack at that, I don't think the Predators are in position to where they should have to do that. What the Predators do need to do is that they need to continue swinging for players with that upside, and then they actually have to be able to develop them properly. The number 10 pick is not a bad pick. It is a pick where you can find a guy like that if you scout and develop correctly. The question is, can the Nashville Predators do that? They've been great at doing it with defensemen. Shea Weber, Roman Josi, Ryan Ellis, Matthias Ekholm, the list goes on. They've been great of doing it with goaltenders. Pekka Rinne, who, by the way, was the starting goaltender the last time the Predators won a playoff series. He has been retired for years now. UC Saros, who, though I do not think is necessarily an elite goaltender at this current point in his career, has still been a goalie of the year, which for those who don't know is called the Vezina. He's been a Vezina caliber player at multiple different points as a Nashville Predator. We know the Preds can develop in other positions. They just do not have the history of developing high-end forwards, and that is what scares me. So what would I do if I were the Nashville Predators? Me personally, I think you don't really have much choice but to run it back. And I know there's going to be a section of the fan base that does not like hearing that. But you've kind of put yourself in between a rock and a hard place with some of these contracts when you swung big for Ryan O'Reilly and Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault and Brady Shea. You kind of put yourself in a position to where you have to at least try to be competitive and compete for a cup. Do I think the Predators are going to compete for a cup? I don't right now. I don't think this team has the roster makeup for it. I don't think this team has the high-end scoring for it. And to be honest, because though we have not gotten to talk about it very much, I don't think UC Saros has been as good as he can be. And not all of that is on him. But I do think that UC Saros has to be better, especially considering that Barry Trotz tied a significant contract to him that Nashville will be tied to for a very long time. And he's not the only one. Brady Shea, the Predators are going to be tied to for a very long time. You still have multiple years left of the Philip Forsberg contract, of the Roman Josi contract. The real kicker is Ryan O'Reilly, whose contract comes up next year. And if the Predators aren't competitive, they need to move off from immediately because Ryan O'Reilly could have netted them a haul at the trade deadline this year. And they decided to go ahead and stick with him. And I respect that. But you cannot lose value on an asset like Ryan O'Reilly, who is a borderline number one center, for nothing in free agency. They cannot sit on their hands. They will not have the time to have the patience that they did this season to wait until December and see if they can turn it around. That slow start they had, all those things, that cannot happen next year. The Nashville Predators are in a state where they need urgency because at one point or another, you're going to have to make the decision. Are we good enough to compete, or do we need to tear this thing down, rebuild, and focus on the future? We're going to talk more about this topic throughout the offseason because I think it is interesting. I think there are many different layers to this that I didn't even get into. And it might have even been a little bit all over the place in this segment because there are just so many different areas of this Nashville Predators conversation. But we're going to talk more about it throughout the next few weeks and the next few months. So you will hear a lot of Preds on this podcast. But for now, we're going to move on. Coming up next, the NCAA tournament is expanding to 76 teams. And I, like many other sports fans, absolutely hate it. We're going to get to that next. Make sure you stick around. You're listening to 3 and Out with Brandon Bigsby, a part of the Game Nashville Sports Network. Final segment. And we're going to talk about what we mentioned in the tease in that last segment. Something that I'm going to warn you now, I might get a little bit passionate about. Because anyone who knows me knows that I love and adore March Madness. It is probably my favorite event in all of sports. I've loved it since I was a kid. Some of my favorite memories come from March Madness. It is one of the few things in this world that I think truly brings people together to a certain extent. So with that, let me ask you this. If something works and something is pretty much universally agreed on as the perfect system, why would you go out of your way to change it? Well, don't tell that to the NCAA, because the NCAA tournament is expanding to a 76-team field, going up from 68. The original first 4 format is being replaced with a new format that will now have 12 teams competing in 6 games. And the winners of those respective games will go into the 64-team bracket as the teams that win the first 4 would in the current bracket system. So nothing changes outside of the first 4 basically being expanded. So nothing crazy, but that's not where my issue with this is. My first issue is the clear fact that this is watering down and diluting a tournament that already has had an issue of quality in terms of the teams that are making it in the field as at-large teams. You go back to this past season, and one of the big conversations throughout Bubble Watch and things of that nature was, is Auburn going to make the NCAA tournament? Well, Auburn's record at the end of the regular season was 17-16. They finished with a 7-11 record in the SEC. And there were serious debates on whether that team was going to get in, that Auburn team that was just one singular game over 500. If that team was going to get in over Miami of Ohio, who is a mid-major who played in the MAC and won 32 games. They went 32-1, went undefeated in the regular season, and the only game they lost was in their conference tournament against UMass, who was not a good team, went 17-15, 7-11 in the conference, in the quarterfinals of their conference tournament. And there was a legitimate argument, one that was being taken quite seriously, that Auburn should get in over Miami. Just because Auburn plays in the SEC, and Miami plays in the MAC. Now, if you want to make the argument that Auburn would crush Miami in a hypothetical game, then yeah, sure, you can make that argument, and you're right to have that opinion if you'd like. But we can't play hypotheticals. We have to deal with what we have in front of us and the stats and the numbers and the games and the tape and all of those things. We can only go with what is tangibly there and what is actually existent. And my point in all of this is that if we were having debates between mid-major teams with weak schedules getting in versus really bad SEC teams getting in that were barely over 500 with a field of 68, what type of teams are we going to be debating should be in the field of a 76 team bracket? Because right now, we're getting to the point now that we're going to have teams under 500 with a case to make the tournament as long as they played a hard enough schedule. And I don't like that. It feels like we are handing out participation trophies, not even for the sake of participation, but for the sake of money and job security. And that brings me to my second biggest issue with this expansion. Absolutely nobody wanted this other than coaches for their own job security and athletic directors for the sake of money. And TV networks, obviously, for the sake of money, which in this case is Turner Sports, so CBS, TNT, TBS, True TV, the broadcast carrier for all of the NCAA tournament March Madness games. And ESPN, because the men's tournament is not the only one expanding to 76. The women's tournament is as well. So while all of these TV networks will rack in millions of extra dollars in revenue from extra games that they are going to be able to cover, we are going to get a much weaker product in terms of the teams that are making it into the NCAA tournament. And to be quite honest with you, these extra teams that are going to be getting in are not going to be legitimate threats to win a national title. They're not going to be legitimate threats in most cases to make the Final Four, to make the Elite Eight. At the absolute most, in a fortunate run, they may be able to contend for a place in the Sweet 16. And if they do, that's awesome. We saw Texas this past tournament make it to the Sweet 16 as a team that was one of the last teams to make it into the field. So it is possible. And Texas is one of the teams that were a mediocre high major team that got into the field because they were a high major team. So there are some cases where this can work and you can see magical runs. UCLA during the post-pandemic bubble NCAA tournament where a last four team in made a magical run to the Final Four. But those cases are few and far between. And it is one thing when you give four of those teams an opportunity, and it is another when you decide to expand it to 12 of those teams getting an opportunity. Because now you are just worsening your product, you are adding extra games, you are giving teams a shot at the tournament that just don't deserve it, and on top of it, the teams that actually probably could use those extra spots aren't the ones that are getting them. The mid-majors are going to be left out in this situation. These 8 extra spots, I guarantee you that in a best case scenario, 7 of them are going to go to high major programs that have below average records just because they played tough competition, even though they probably aren't that big of a gap between them and the really good mid-major team. As an example, let's talk about Belmont. Belmont was dominant all season long. Yes, they are a mid-major team. Yes, they play in the Missouri Valley Conference. And yes, they had an embarrassing 2 losses to end their season. And I understand all of that. I really, really do. That Belmont team, I don't think would have gotten in under this new format. I just don't feel confident that that would have been something that had happened. Because though Belmont went 26-6, they are a mid-major. They do not have the opportunities to go play against an Auburn or some of these other bubble teams in the past who have been able to consistently squeak their way into the last 4 in because they're a high major team that has a couple of good wins here that carry their entire resume to where all of the losses mean less. They don't get that opportunity. And there is a much deeper conversation that goes into this because I know a lot of you are asking, well, hey, why aren't they scheduling them? Let me tell you that these teams want to play and have the opportunities against those schools. But those big schools don't want that smoke. They just don't. Because it doesn't make sense for them. In the NCAA tournament, resumes are everything. Analytics, numbers, graphs, charts, they have taken over the landscape of the NCAA tournament talk and resume talk and bubble watch. And the last thing that one of these high major teams want to see is a team like Belmont, who is a legitimately good mid-major program, has been one of the best and most consistent mid-major programs in the country for the better part of 20 years now. They do not want that team to come into their building and beat them. And on top of that, they do not want to pay 6 figures for that team to travel to their city and beat them. And they sure aren't going to travel to them. So therefore, teams like Belmont, a team like Lipscomb in 2019, who made it all the way to the NIT final and lost in the ASUN championship despite being one of the better mid-major teams, not making the tournament, teams like that get left out. Because these high major teams don't want to risk taking that loss, a loss that is considered a quad 3 loss or a quad 4 loss. And when it comes down to stacking up resumes against each other, that one game can be the difference between making the NCAA tournament or missing the NCAA tournament and the coach being fired. That is how razor thin the margin is more times than not for these programs and for these coaches. And in the current landscape of NIL and the transfer portal and all of this money that is being invested and thrown around by boosters and rev share and collectives and this, that, and the other, the patience level is so much lower for these coaches. And the room for error is so much smaller. If you don't make the NCAA tournament by year 3, your seat is scorching hot more times than not. Because nowadays, you're expected to go into the portal. You're expected to take that boatload of money that these billionaires and millionaires are giving you, and you are expected to go and build and buy a team that can get you into the NCAA tournament. That is the expectation now. And we have seen a lot of teams be able to go in and do that successfully. Look at Vanderbilt. Mark Byington, 2 years in, after Vanderbilt had been a dumpster fire for the last 8 years under Bryce Drew and Jerry Stackhouse, Mark Byington came in, got an entire new team, made the tournament year 1. The next year, had to replace a lot of that team, went into the portal, recruited well, made the tournament once again, was a top 25 team throughout the year, even won a game, and were just inches away from making it to the Sweet 16. That is how quickly things can be rebuilt in this current era of NIL and the transfer portal for the high major programs. For the mid-major programs, their players are the ones that are getting picked apart. Their coaches are the ones that are leaving and taking these high major jobs. I will go back to Belmont for an example. As I mentioned, a team that went 26-6, were dominant all year long, and took 2 really bad, unfortunate losses to end their season against teams that were in the bottom half of their conference. And that completely killed not only their chance to make the tournament, but it completely killed any chance of them being an at-large team because they took 2 horrible losses for the metrics. Casey Alexander, the head coach of that Belmont team, then left to take the Kansas State job. And because of that, Belmont ended their season without playing in the NIT, They opted out of the NIT. They opted out of any postseason tournament that was not the NCAA tournament. And with that, a lot of Belmont's talent transferred. They left to high major programs, just like their head coach did. Tyler Lundblade, leading scorer, gone. Drew Sharnowski, one of the leading rebounders, one of the leading scorers on that team, gone. Sam Orm, gone. That team has been decimated from the team that won 26 games a year ago. And when you go and you look at their non-conference schedule, the best team that Belmont was able to play was College of Charleston. And they beat College of Charleston by 23 points in their building. My point in saying all of this is this. If you were going to expand the NCAA tournament, then it is what it is. Can we at least give that to teams that could use the opportunity? Teams that actually win games, that need the opportunity to prove that they can hang with and potentially beat the big dogs of the sport? We do not need 17-15 Virginia Tech making it into the NCAA tournament. That's not entertaining. But those are teams that are going to make the most money. Those are the teams that are going to bring in revenue. Those are the teams that are in these high major conferences like the ACC and the SEC, the Big 12 and the Big 10. Those are the teams that benefit the TV networks. They benefit the NCAA. And most importantly, they benefit the coaches and the athletic directors of those programs. They do not care about the Belmonts of the world. They do not care about the Illinois States of the world. They do not care about the Miami Ohios and the Buffaloes and the Toledos. Those programs are irrelevant to them. Because at the end of the day, the only use those programs have to them are easy buy games to pad their schedule and inflate their metrics and give them quick 40-point victories that'll make them look dominant because they are catching them when they have a bad year or when they know that that team is not going to be good coming into the season. Or when the coach ends up leaving and they can poach him, or the players want to go and get the biggest check possible and they enter the transfer portal and they can go off from $2 or $3 million to come be a part of their program. That is the role of these mid-majors to allow these high major programs. They are nothing more than a feeder system to make the strong even stronger. And I hate that the NCAA tournament expanding and ruining what was already pretty much a perfect system is only there to feed into that more. And just as another prime example of how money and greed overall has completely infiltrated the beauty of what used to be college sports. And I don't mean to be the shaking my fist, yelling at the clouds, oh, back in my day, things were better when I was growing up. I don't mean to be that guy. But again, it's another example of the impact that money has had on college sports. We're used to this on the pro side. Money has always ruled the professional side of sports. We know that. But college sports used to be amateurism. And that's been long gone a long time ago. But it's really the wild, wild west now. And unfortunately, I think we've opened Pandora's box and we're never really going to be able to get back to the way it used to be. But it doesn't mean we can't help regulate it a little bit. All I am asking is give the teams that win an opportunity. Give them that chance. If these high majors aren't going to schedule these guys themselves in the non-conference, then make them play them in the NCAA tournament when they've proven that they're going to win games. If they can't hang with them, then fine. But I would much rather see the opportunity of a mid-major team that won 25 to 30 games get that chance to play one of those mid-level high major teams and see if they can beat them, to see if they can hang with schools like that. Because that's been the argument. That has been the argument for God knows how long, is that the little guys can't hang with the big guys. Show me. Show me. That's the perfect opportunity. Prove it to me. I would much rather see that, and I think that many fans would much rather see that than to see the 17-16 team from the ACC go up against the 18-14 team from the Big 10. I'm just saying. So don't water down this tournament even more than it already is, because we are very much on the track to doing so. I know that the future selection committees are probably not listening to this. They are going to put in below average, high major teams that are not actually quality enough to make the NCAA tournament. And the mid-majors, that could be a fun story, that could potentially embarrass some of these high major programs. They're going to be on the outside looking in, wondering what if they could get that opportunity, what they could be able to do with it. Instead, they will be banished off to the NIT, which is always known as the not invited tournament for a reason. And they're going to have to just settle for that while they play fellow mid-majors, because a lot of these high major programs have also become too good for the NIT now. I will give Auburn credit for that. At least they played out the NIT, and guess what? They went and won the whole thing. So good on them. They competed and they won, and they proved that that high major team is better than those mid-major teams they were playing. They showed it. And I respect that. I want to be shown. I don't want to be told who is better than who. Give the mid-majors that opportunity to show it. Give the high majors that opportunity to show that they are who they say they are. That's all I'm asking. And though I think that this whole expansion is going to be an awful thing, and though I do think it is going to completely kill what makes this tournament so special, and that it is the best teams from the respective conferences, the best teams from these at-larges that can make it into the field, though I think it is going to dilute that, there is a chance for the NCAA to make it right. And I implore them to do that. What a fun first episode, man. This was a lot of fun. A little bit long, but that's okay. Thank you guys for listening in. If you want to follow me, at Brandon Bigsby _ on Twitter, at Brandon Calls Games on Instagram. Once again, you can catch all of these podcasts on all of your streaming platforms. We'll be back soon with another episode of 3 and Out with Brandon Bigsby. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for sticking with me. Hope you have a blessed rest of your day, a blessed rest of your week, and we will see you guys on the next episode.